News Talk is online. News Talk Online is a production of paltalk.com, the largest multimedia interactive program on the internet with more than 4 million unique users on demand on iTunes and YouTube and Blip TV, and on my blog, GaryBaumgarten.com, where you're encouraged to post your comments, whether you agree with yours truly or not. No retribution. And thanks to our good friends at CRN Digital Talk Radio, we're syndicated to an additional 12 million households. I am your host, Gary Baumgarten. I welcome you to the show, and I encourage you, as I always do, to go to the Pal Talk News Network website, which resides at reportergary.com. That's reportergary.com for stories that you may or may not see, hear, or read in the mainstream media. Let's go to our guest, Chris toenfing, who, as I said, is the Executive Director of the Middle East Research and Information Project, which just spews out. It's an independent organization that just spews out so much information that you cannot find in the mainstream media, which seems to be paralyzed when it comes to covering the Middle East. And we're so thankful that you're around, Chris, to do that. And we are thankful that you are here with us today on News Talk Online on the Pal Talk News Network. Welcome.
Thanks a lot for having me, Gary.
My pleasure indeed. And you obviously are on the phone. You didn't see that video. Maybe you saw it previously, but it was a little bit reminiscent of Tiananmen Square. The young man stood right in front of the water cannon like the fella did at Tiananmen Square in front of the tank. He wasn't able to make them stand down as the People's Army stood down in Tiananmen Square, but there's no question that the people of Egypt have been living under what is quite an autocratic kind of system that Hosni Mubarak has imposed upon them for 30-plus years now. And perhaps it is time, and perhaps this is reflective of a need for some kind of a change in Egypt. But I'm sure you share with me the concerns that if there is a void, whoever takes over or whatever entity takes over could be much, much worse for the world than what we see there today.
Well, I think what's happening in Egypt is unprecedented and extremely exciting. Just to return to that clip that you showed for a second, I have seen it, and I was struck just now listening to it over the phone, listening to the guy yelling in the background. He keeps yelling "Geda, Geda," which in Egyptian Arabic basically means, to translate very, very loosely, "You've got cojones." So, you know, all of the people watching that young man standing in front of the water cannon are absolutely jubilant, watching that demonstration of somebody like in Tiananmen Square, yes, standing up in the face of the threat of state violence and being able for at least a short time to face up to it. And that, I think, is the real one of the key takeaways from the demonstration on January 25th the other day, which was that for the first time in a long time, the number of protesters in the main square of downtown Cairo was greater than the number of riot police. The riot police couldn't hem them in and keep bystanders from seeing them, let alone joining them. And the protesters were basically calling the shots, for the time being. And obviously the big question is whether this will continue. There's another big protest planned for tomorrow, and most people think that I've been talking to that the success or failure of the protest tomorrow will kind of be the make or break moment for whether what happens in Egypt will parallel what has occurred in Tunisia or not. And the other thing, to return to the other part of your question, on January 25th, the Muslim Brotherhood kind of conspicuously stayed away. The leadership was trying to actually to restrain some of its younger members who wanted to join the protests from going out, at least under the banner of the Muslim Brothers. Whereas tomorrow, the Muslim Brothers are supposed to participate a little bit more, and so we'll see, if that alters the regime's response, if that alters the tone of the protests, if they take on more of an Islamist tone or not, because so far, just like in Tunisia, the message of these protests is it's not Allahu Akbar. It has nothing to do with that. It's very simple. We're tired of living under a dictatorship. We want the dictatorship gone. We want to dismantle one-party rule. We're tired of corruption. We're tired of a political economic system that keeps the aspirations of young people down, that doesn't allow people with educations to get jobs commensurate with their skills. We're just tired of the whole system, and we want meaningful change. And that's been the message so far. And that's the message that really resonates. And it really resounds in the region from what happened in Tunisia. As far as what the United States should do, the number one best thing it can do, if the goal of U.S. policy is genuinely to promote democracy and freedom in the region, the number one best thing it can do is to tell Mubarak and his cronies that the jig is up, and that there won't be any overt or covert U.S. aid to him in the coming days. No, shipments of arms. No training sessions for riot police with the Pentagon. Nothing like that that the U.S. Has provided both to his regime and others in the past as a way of containing internal dissent. So number one thing the U.S. could do and should do would be to just stop doing what it has been doing, for 30 years in the case of Mubarak. As far as a message to send the protesters themselves, that's interesting. I hear kind of two different messages from people with their finger on the pulse in Egypt. One of the messages is that Egyptians do want to hear some words of encouragement from the United States, and the other contradictory message that I have been hearing is that Egyptians don't want to hear anything. They just want the United States to stop its overt and covert backing for the Mubarak regime, and it's for Egyptians, as with Tunisians in the case of Ben Ali, it's more than just the person of Mubarak and the family and the immediate entourage. It's also the sort of the whole system that these guys have built up over time, whether it's one-party rule, whether it's very, very corrupt security apparatus in the case of Tunisia, the very corrupt security apparatus and army in the case of Egypt. It's a much bigger task than just getting one man and his family to board a private plane for exile in Saudi Arabia. Although Egyptians are one of the chants that's going on in Egypt is basically that hey Mubarak, Ben Ali's waiting for you over in Saudi Arabia.
So I heard that Mohammed el-Baradi, in fact we reported it I believe yesterday, was in spite of death threats making his way back to his native Egypt. El-Baradi, of course, the Nobel Prize winning former head of the IAEA, with a manifesto basically demanding that Mubarak stand down. So I guess the question I have about el-Baradi is he trying to position himself to become the president? And what kind of a transition might there be if Mubarak does capitulate under the pressure of the protesters?
Great question. First of all, I think while I personally would like to see Mubarak capitulate, and the sooner the better, I think there would have to be a sustained series of protests on the scale of the ones on the 25th for that to happen. This regime is pretty entrenched, and their public statements so far indicate that they have a steely resolve to remain in place. It is significant that Baradi went back to Cairo and that he made a statement in public saying he offers himself up. Basically, he's willing to serve as the coordinator of a transition to a more democratic Egypt if he's called upon to do so. How he would make that happen is anybody's guess. He is not he's a very well-known figure in Egypt, of course, but he is not a person who has a big political or social base. He's kind of a diffident intellectual type. He doesn't, have a lot of foot soldiers, and I'm not sure exactly who he would be able to mobilize behind him. If Mubarak were to go, the most logical scenario is that he would do so at the urging of the army itself, which would then try to impose rule itself, or through some front group of civilians, probably people who had something to do with the old regime. And Baradei, if he wants to maintain credibility with the Egyptian people, he would have to stay away from scenarios like that. But this is all getting way ahead of the game. I would not hazard a prediction as to what's going to happen tomorrow in Egypt, let alone in 2 weeks. But my best guess right now is that this is still going to play out for some time to come.
What is going to happen then? I mean, in terms of it playing out for some time to come, and if the demonstrations do get larger and larger, and they've been communicating via Twitter and Facebook, and they've shut down Twitter and Facebook in Egypt, but I presume that there's some SMSing going on to get the word out. The word is out there now anyway, and people know to turn up at Revolution Square every day just to see what's going on, I guess, if there's no other means of communication, and that causes for people to gather there. But thus far, the military, I think, has pretty much stayed out of it. The police department, which is almost an arm of the military from what I can gather, I mean, they're a very strong paramilitary organization, have shown a lot of force, but a high degree of restraint. But if the numbers of demonstrators grow and are sustained, that sets things up for a real confrontation between the people in uniform and the people who are not.
That's right. And the riot police, if they have, so as you said, the riot police, while the cameras are on during the day, have been restrained in comparison to those in Tunisia about a month ago. At night, when they have freer reign, they've been a little bit more brutal, and that's when the deaths have occurred. And they're also being more brutal outside the sort of glare of the international media in provincial towns like the town of Suez on the Suez Canal, where the clashes between the police and the protesters have been quite violent. But yes, the $60,000 question going forward is if the army will be called out by the regime, and if so, what the army will do. Calling out the army is a risky move for the regime to make. It's sort of a de facto concession, the de facto conceding the point that the protests are otherwise uncontrollable, number one. So it's a move that is equally susceptible to being interpreted as a show of strength or a show of weakness. And the other big question is, what would the army actually do? Not the commanders, not the big generals who are pretty compromised by their own association with the regime and have a lot to lose if the regime were to fall, but the ordinary conscripts who, in most cases are just as badly off as the people who are protesting in the streets and may not obey an order to fire upon their countrymen. And that is what has happened in past revolutionary situations around the world, not just in the Arab world. And so calling out the army would be a risky step, and it would be, I think, a sign of desperation in some ways, even if it did wind up succeeding. And so I think it's one that the regime is going to resist taking for now, as it waits to see, along with the rest of us, whether the protests continue to be so sizable and so vehement.
Well, let's hope that if it does come to that they do show restraint and refuse to follow the orders to pull the triggers on unarmed civilians. That would be the worst case scenario.